Life is a struggle, and the struggle is real. It's a little more real for some of us than others of us, but I can tell you the struggle is real for me. And one of the reasons that the struggle is real is because I am bicuspal. See, when I was 16 years old, I was living in Santiago, Chile, and I was going to school in a all-boys private Catholic school. And I was 16 years old, and my classmates were 16 years old. And if there's something I learned, among the many things I learned in Santiago that year, I learned that 16-year-old boys are the same in South America as they are in North America. 16-year-old boys are 16-year-old boys everywhere. And we thought the most hilarious thing that we could do was teach each other to cuss in our native language. So my Chilean brothers taught me all of their favorite cuss words in Spanish, and I taught them all of my favorite cuss words that I had learned a few years earlier at Boy Scout camp. Now, I realized that I learned a lot of great things in scouting, but it was at summer camp where I learned all of the things that no one would ever tell me, and I learned to be fluent in cussing at scout camp, and so I taught my Chilean brothers the English versions, and when we would pass each other in the hall, we would call each other out, and I would murder the Spanish curse words, and they would murder the English curse words, and we would just laugh, and it was hilarious, and we thought we were just geniuses because we were 16, and we were cussing out loud in languages that the other person didn't understand, and we thought it was genius. Well, the next year, I was studying with the University of San Francisco in Valencia, Spain. And every day after class, some classmates and I would go to a bar that was around the corner from the house that we were living in. And by then my Spanish had gotten pretty good, but the Spaniards there in Valencia called me the Chileno because I had developed what they said was a South American accent in my Spanish. But they also knew I was an American, so they had fun with us, and we got to know them over time. And one day we were in there, and we were having an argument, or I was having an argument with the bartenders there in the bar in Valencia. And the Spanish bartender was telling me that he had watched many American Westerns, and he knew that the American people were cruel and brutal to the natives that lived in America when the Americans settled the western part of the country. He told us we were imperialists and we were brutal and we were rude, and he was chastising me, condemning me for being a rude American. To which I said, well, if I'm not mistaken, what is the language that they speak in all of Mexico and all of Central America and most of South America? It's Spanish, isn't it? It's not Incan, it's not Mayan. And have you ever heard of Vasco da Gama and Cortez and the conquistadors? And I said to him, ¿Qué piensas sobre eso? Which means, what do you think about that, pal? And then I added a full string, a flurry that I thought was fairly elegant of all of the Spanish curse words that I had learned the year before in South America. He instantly leapt across the bar, grabbed my throat and threw me to the ground and began hitting my head on the concrete floor of the bar. You see, I had insulted his family, his genetics, his nation. And I wish I could tell you that in that moment, as my head was being beat against the concrete floor of a Spanish bar, that I had a moment of clarity. But by the time my friends pulled him off of me, I began to realize something that unfortunately I have had to learn over and over and over throughout my life. And that is the power of words. The words can not only heal, but words can hurt. Words can incense. That we have power just with our words to do great harm. Now, you would have thought that I would have learned that lesson there on the floor of the bar in Valencia, but it's a lesson that I've had to learn over and over. It's been a struggle for me to realize that there are times when there are things that I should not say. And there are words that by their very nature have a serrated edge. They have a supercharged capacity to harm others. So today I want to share with you the things that I've learned, the hard-earned lessons that I've learned over my lifetime about the power of words. And today I want to share with you the 5 rules of Christian cussing. The rules that I have learned about, if you take your faith seriously, how it is that we should cuss. Now I can see by the look on your faces that we should pray right now. So that's what we'll do. Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your words spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to remind us of the freedom and the responsibility we have with our speech. I pray that for myself and for my family, for all of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. I suppose that there are some of you here today who don't curse. You never do. You have made a decision out of discipline or conviction that you will not ever utter an inappropriate word. And I want to say to you, God bless you. May your tribe increase. You are the saints among us. But I want you to know that there are some of us who struggle with this. There are some of us for whom we cannot maintain the conviction or the discipline that you are maintaining. And so it's for us, it's for those of us who struggle to remember in key moments in our life the power of our words and the danger of certain words. It's for those of us who struggle with that I want to share with you these 5 rules. Now, there may also be a couple of you here who have been paying attention over the last 2 weeks. And you may say, wait a minute, I thought 2 weeks ago we began a conversation about Colossians chapter 3. Weren't we going to study the Bible? What in the wide world of sports does 5 rules of Christian cussing have to do with the book of Colossians? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because what we began 3 weeks ago was a conversation about the reality of our struggle, that life is a struggle. And we were trying to find our hope in the midst of that struggle. And we began by asking the question, why is it so hard to be a good person? In the first part of Colossians chapter 3, in Paul's letter to that church, he focuses on sort of the internal dynamics. And he challenges us to be worthy of the people we were made to be. And my suggestion was the reason the struggle is real, the reason it is so hard for us to be good people is because we were made for more. We were made for better days. We were made of and for better things. And so in that struggle to be who God made us to be, we sense the tension of this life. Well, today we come to the part where Paul begins to transition from that internal examination of why it is so hard to be a good person to an examination of why is it so hard to be good to others? Why is it so hard for us to be kind and to be gracious to other people? And what he begins with is he says that begins with our words. The words that we use are the things that help us to be good to each other. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 8, he says, now is the time. The time is now to get rid of anger and rage and malicious behavior and slander and dirty language. Don't lie to each other, he says. Don't tell each other lies, because you have stripped off your old sinful nature and its wicked deeds, and you have put on, you have clothed yourself in your new nature. And we are being renewed as we learn to know our Creator and become like Him. It's here in these 3 verses that I apply this struggle to understand the power of my words. And I come up with 5 rules. And the first rule is this, is if you struggle to watch your language, if you're going to cuss, then cuss as if we choose our words intentionally. Our words are intentionally chosen. If you're going to cuss by saying the things you mean. Own it. Don't blame your mother. Don't blame your environment. Don't blame your neighbor. Own it. You see, we have a tendency to think that curse words are reactionary. That they're just kind of the things that come out of us in those moments when we're walking through the living room at night in the dark and we're trying to make our way for a late night snack at the refrigerator, and we step on one of our kids' Legos in our bare feet and it embeds itself in our foot, and we think that we stepped on some kind of landmine, and then we walk into the coffee table that we forgot was there. And then we look in the fridge and our kids have eaten all of the chocolate cake that we were going to eat. And I tell you, in that moment, aw shucks just doesn't cut it. Or gosh darn it. Or dag nabbit just doesn't have the same visceral satisfaction as words that kind of dwell up from within us. And we think that we curse because we're reacting. It's just kind of who we are. Well, Paul says, no. You have a choice. We have a choice, and we have the ability, he says, to strip off, to take off that old part of us and replace it with a new part. The word that he uses there in Colossians chapter 3, verse 8 is the word apothese or apotithemi. Apothese is in the New Testament Greek. It is a first aorist middle imperative. And what New Testament scholars say about the aorist middle imperative is that it is an ingressive action, not aggressive, ingressive. It implies the beginning of things. It implies an urgent sense of activity. But what it really implies is volition. What it implies is choice. That we do have a choice. Our words are our choice. In that moment, you may not be thinking like Shakespeare and you come up with some poetic cussing phrase, but the reality is long before that, we make choices about the words that we want to use because we make choices about the people we want to be. If you're going to cuss, remember that we choose our words intentionally. If you're going to cuss as if you choose every word intentionally. The second rule is if you're going to cuss as if your words are lethal weapons. Cuss as if our words are lethal weapons. Now, we understand this. Culturally, it is overwhelming. It's hyperbolized. We have hair triggers on our vocabulary, where our PC culture has sensitized us to the harmful nature of certain words, of certain kinds of language. And we often associate the intent with the words, but really it's really about the heart. It's not just about the vocabulary. See, here in verses 8 and 9, the Apostle Paul is talking about the words that we use. In fact, he ends verse 8 by saying, the words that come out of our mouths. And then he says, you're supposed to be intentionally putting away these kinds of words, these kinds of attitudes, these things from your heart. And there's 4 things that he lists. It looks like he lists 5, but there's really just 4. The first 2, anger and rage, are the Greek words orge and thumos. And whenever they occur together in the New Testament, the word thumos, which means passion, is modifying the word orge, anger. So what it's referring to is that incendiary anger, that intoxication with anger, that passionate rage. And he says, don't put away the speech that is basically motivated by that passionate rage. And we all know the trouble that speaking from that place gets us. And it's not the specific words, it's the intent of those words. The next word he says is kakion, and it's translated malicious deeds. But he's talking about words here. And the word malice, it's the words that we say to intentionally harm. We say these things not to surgically help people, but for revenge, for payback, to insult or to critique. These are the malicious words. Then he says blasphemao. That's the third word. That's the word from which we get blasphemy. And it means to insult someone's character. It means to undermine their integrity. It means slander. Don't use slanderous terms. Don't talk about people negatively behind their back. That's cursing. And then he says, or the word askrologion, and it means intentionally deceptive words. Words that are untrue. Words that are corroded words. He says, these are the things that we are to put away from ourselves. Put away from ourselves these attitudes. Not these specific words, but these attitudes that harm others, that deceive others, that tear others down. Understand that if you're going to cuss, that our words are lethal weapons. The third rule is, if you're going to cuss as if every word you say is true. Now, in our vocabulary, in the English language, most of our curse words are exaggerations. They're not true. When I tell a person or I identify them as being made from human waste, or I say that they are descended from a female of another species, or I'm looking at my computer that just ate the document that I have been working on all day, and I look at it and I condemn it to an eternity of suffering and torture, that's not possible. It's a lie. It's not true. I don't know. That's just bad theology. If I condemn my computer to suffering and torment, that's not how it works. I mean, that's bad theology, and I also don't have that authority. And so embedded in the idea of these curse words of coarse language is an element of untruth. And what Paul is saying is, anytime we lie, we're cursing. Because we're not just cursing the person we're lying to, we're cursing ourselves. Because that's the thing about a lie. The thing about a lie, whether we tell it to protect ourselves or to elevate ourselves or to exaggerate our importance, however, whatever reason we use to lie, it does more harm to us than it does to the person that we lie to. And it can be very harmful to the person that we lie to, but ultimately we are the victims of our own untruth. What Paul says in verse 9 is just don't lie to each other. I am a fan of a guy named Jordan Peterson. I don't know how many of you are aware of Jordan Peterson. He's one of the most influential public intellectuals who is out speaking today. And he wrote this book a couple of years ago called The 12 Rules for Life. He sold almost 4 million copies, selling at 20,000 copies a week. But Jordan Peterson has traveled the world teaching on these 12 rules of life, and if you haven't read this book, I would recommend it. But his 8th rule, out of the 12 rules, his 8th rule, Jordan Peterson's 8th rule, is always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And the whole chapter is devoted to the corrosive nature of lying, not in relationships, but to the character of the person who lies. How it actually weakens our character. And the person who ultimately suffers for lying is us. This is what he says in chapter 8. He says, if you say untrue things, if you act out a lie, you weaken your character. If you have weak character, then adversity will mow you down when it appears, as it will inevitably. You will hide, but there will be no place left to hide. And then you will find yourself doing terrible things. You see, when we curse, you have to curse. If you curse, remember that you have to curse as if everything you're saying is true about you. When we curse, remember everything we say is true about us. The fourth rule is if you're going to cuss, wear your words as your wardrobe. You're going to cuss as if your words are your wardrobe. Our words are what define us. I mean, we are preoccupied with fashion and preoccupied with how we look, and we understand the power of wardrobe. I understand that if a person walks here in a uniform, that we instantly attribute to them certain responsibilities, certain capacities, certain authority. If a surgeon walks into an OR in scrubs, it tells us something about what he is or she is prepared to do. It's the same way we dress in certain ways to reflect our status, to reflect our agenda, to reflect our personality. When you meet a homeless person on a street, you can generally tell from the clothes that they wear that they are suffering through hard times. Our words are no different. Our words are our wardrobe. In verses 9 and 10 of Colossians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul he uses a metaphor. And it's a metaphor where he uses the same word in opposites. The word is dousomenoi, but it's apekdousomenoi and endousomenoi, and it's to take off and to put on clothes. And he's saying we take off and we put on clothes to reflect who we are. We change our vocabulary to reflect who we are. We take off a certain vocabulary to reflect the person we want to be. It's just like taking off a uniform or taking off our clothes and putting on different clothes. He says this is what we do with our sinful nature and its wicked ways, and then we put on our new nature. And I think in the context of what he's saying, it's a reflection in our vocabulary. The fifth rule is if you're going to cuss as if the stupidest thing that you are no smarter than the stupidest thing you say. Cuss as if you are no smarter than the stupidest thing you say. You're only as smart as the dumbest thing you say. See, I have a tendency to believe, I have a theory, that curse words are the lowest common denominator of language. We all understand their intent. We all understand their meaning. And so the idea behind them is what we associate with them, and it's the lowest form of communication. You're not exactly Shakespeare when you string off a string of expletives, although I've heard some people that can cuss like a poet, but the reality is, it really is sort of the communication that requires no preparation or no thought. It is the lowest form of communication. It's what we say when we don't know what else to say. When there's no other word that really captures our anger or our frustration or our shock or our pain. That's where these words are very effective. But if we want to be elegant, if we want to be intelligent, we grow in our vocabulary, we grow in our ability to express ourselves more precisely. In verse 10, he says that we are being renewed as we learn to know our Creator and be like Him. How are we like our Creator? How are we renewed? It's what I call displacement theory. How are we renewed? Renewal, it doesn't take place because I identify everything that's wrong with me. And then I just focus on not doing that or not being that. The way that we are renewed is I may understand what's wrong with me, but I also understand how to make it right. And I don't focus on avoiding the wrong, I focus on doing the right. In fact, my theory goes, if you are so busy doing the right things, you will have no time to do the wrong things. It's displacement theory. If you have a container and it's full of contaminated water and you begin to flush it out with fresh water, eventually you will displace the contaminated water with the fresh water if you pour in enough of the fresh. So our language, our vocabulary is not just about avoiding certain words, it's actually about practicing certain things. I happen to believe that the universe is held in equilibrium. And that applies to things like when you say something cruel, that equilibrium is restored when you say something affirming. When you say something that cuts someone down, it's restored when you say something that builds someone up. But it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, it's feathers and lead. The lead is the critique. The lead is the criticism. The lead is the serrated edge of the word that cuts, that hurts. It's the supercharged vocabulary that's harmful. That's not made up for by one compliment. It's feathers and lead. A bucket full of feathers outweighs a bucket full of feathers 100-fold. And the reality is that when we have an opportunity to repair something that we have said badly, it takes perhaps 10 times or 20 times. Or if you ever say something harmful or hurtful to your children, you may spend years trying to repair that wound with affirmation and encouragement. But that's what it means to be renewed. That's what he's talking about here. When I was growing up, I grew up with guns. We had guns on our farm, and from as far back as I can remember, my grandfather taught me how to shoot. I had a .22 caliber rifle, and I killed a whole lot of cans and bottles and little critters on the farms over the years. And the reality is my grandfather was a stickler for gun safety. And he taught us from the very beginning, the number one rule of handling a firearm was you never point it at another person. See, I buried the lead on this message. What Paul is talking about is Paul is not talking about specific vocabulary. He's not saying, here's the words you should not say. What he's saying is, when you point the heart intent, your cruelty and your judgment and your criticism at another person, be very careful, because there's power in those words. He doesn't give us a grocery list of words we should or shouldn't say. He says, this is the attitude you should not have behind whatever words you use. Because you don't have to use curse words to curse someone. 5 rules that I've learned over the years of my life is, first one is that if I'm going to speak harsh words, I should do it intentionally. And if I'm going to speak harsh words, I should realize that they are weapons, that they are harmful, that they are lethal weapons. And if I'm going to speak hurtful or coarse or cursing words, I need to remember that what I'm saying needs to be true. I also realize that words define me. Words are my wardrobe. And that I'm only as smart as the dumbest thing that I say. Now, I know that there are some of you here who don't struggle with this. You have made a decision, and I totally understand that. I totally understand, for the sake of your children, for the sake of your sanctification, for the sake of your relationships, for the sake of your convictions or your personal discipline, you just don't cuss. You don't do it. My wife, literally, I knew my wife for 20 years before I heard her utter a single curse word. I never heard her curse until the day she tried to murder me. And I've told you that story before, and we don't have time to go into it right now. But for 20 years, I never heard her curse. We decided not to curse in front of our children. That was a decision that we made. And I know there are some of you here who, for that kind of discipline and for that kind of conviction, that's your practice. And God bless you. You are the saints among us. But the rest of us have had to learn to get by. Have learned to struggle to say the right thing in the right way, and have learned the difficulty about how to say what we're feeling when there's not a right word. And I've learned to do it in 2 different languages. I'm bicussable. But I also know how to speak a third. I know how to curse in a third language. I know how to curse in church. I think some of you know how. It's something that you learn over time. I've learned it over time through trial and error by standing in front of congregations and saying words like crap. And people go, oh no, shouldn't say that. Or a word like screw, I screwed up. No, shouldn't say that. I got in trouble for saying the word suck one time. No, can't. So I'm fluent in the language of church cussing. But what I've learned and what I want to share with you today are the top 10 Christian cuss words. And basically, they're just the substitutes for the words that we don't want to use. And numbers 10, 9, and 8, I think we all know. I mean, basically, it's heck and darn and shoot, right? Or shucks. We know what those are. We know what heck, darn, and shoot mean, but that's what we say. We say heck, darn, and shoot. Now, number 7 on the list is a little more sensitive. It's crap or crapola. What I tried to do was I would say C-rap, and then people caught on. They go, you're just saying crap. You can't say that. Number 6 is, it really has power if you're a good Catholic, because you got to say it like this: Mother Mary Frances. That's number 7. Number 6. Number 5 is sketchy. I know it's freaking or friggin' or frackin' or effin'. I mean, Fuddruckers is not fooling us. We know what that's saying. And we know what those words mean, but we can get away with that sometimes. The next 2 words work if you're Canadian or you're Scottish. And it's ice hole and arse. Like if you're Canadian, you say, it's an ice hole, eh? Or if you're Scotch, you can say, I fill on my arse. And it sounds good. Sounds okay. Number 3 is kind of a redneck surrogate cuss word. I don't know where it comes from, but it's the word jackwagon. Jackwagon. It just feels right when I'm on Mopac and I get cut off to call a guy a jackwagon. My wife hates that word. Number 2 is my personal favorite, and it's shiitake mushrooms. You just got to drag out the first part of that, and it redeems it with the take mushrooms part. And then the last one is son of a bee sting, or son of a barbershop, or son of whatever starts with a B, son of a bookbinder, or whatever. And I've learned over the years that if you say those things, you can kind of get away with them in church. But really, it's not about the words, is it? It's about what the words mean. It's about the intent. In the late 1850s, the most popular preacher in all of England was a guy named Charles Haddon Spurgeon. At 19 years old, in April of 1854, he became the pastor of the New Park Street Chapel in London at 19. When he became the pastor of the church, there were a few hundred members. By the end of that year, by the end of 1954, they had outgrown the church building and had moved to a hall that held 5,000 people. By the time he was 24 years old, he was recognized as the Prince of Preachers. In 1857, in October of 1857, he spoke to the largest worship gathering in the history of England. He spoke to 23,546 or 654 people at the Crystal Palace. 23,564 people, or 654 people. 654 people in the Crystal Palace in London. But he was controversial for a number of things. First of all, he was controversial for his appetite when he relaxed for fine cigars and good Scotch whiskey. He was also controversial for his rigid theology and for his vocal statements against slavery. But the thing that most people criticized Charles Haddon Spurgeon for was his plain language. He was criticized in church circles for speaking the language of the streets, for speaking the way that people spoke in their parlors and in bars. But it's what made him wildly popular. He preached 3,800 sermons, all of which were published, and they were bestsellers in their day. He was a pastor for 31 years. And there's an urban legend that grew up around Charles Haddon Spurgeon. It was a legend about a woman who came up to him one Sunday after he had preached a particularly plain-spoken message. And she said, "Pastor Spurgeon, I must tell you I am upset with the things that you have said in your message and the way that you said them." And according to the urban legend, Spurgeon looked at the woman and he said, "Madam, I beg you, before you condemn me for the things that I did say, to commend me for the things I did not say." I would point out to you that I made it through this entire message without uttering a curse word. And it was a struggle the whole time. Because I knew that there were points when it would just be hilarious. But you would miss the point. It wasn't easy. It was a struggle, as it is for most of us, because the struggle is real.